Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. You know, we live in these trying times, and I kind of wonder what's going on in the world, and you see so many people spouting so much hate against, both sides in the coming war that looks like that's happening in Israel. And what I'm about to quote, or the person I'm about to quote, is controversial in his own right because he's a Trump. Donald Trump Jr., or Trump's son Jr., has said without any qualms why you should have a 30-round magazine. You need to only look towards what happened in Israel this weekend. Any one of us in the 2A who know anything about guns have known that more rounds, especially in stressful situations, is a good thing. Because we know that bad things happen, and you are under stress, and you're now under fire. It's better to have enough ammunition to take care of the threat, especially, when rounds are coming, when it's a two-way range, let's put it that way. Because a two-way range is a hell of a lot different than a one-way range. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with a two-way range, I mean where the rounds are coming back at you. Okay? This is something that's just inherently duh. Okay? But in the 2A, we have kind of a win story to share that I think is pretty awesome. And there's two of them. They're kind of paired together. So Illinois has had this mandate that made them, any citizen in Illinois who is a 2A member, was supposed to register their firearms. And after, about a month or two of this law being enacted, they have less than a 1% compliance rate. Now, Massachusetts is planning on doing the same thing, and their entire sheriff's association has stood up and said they don't support this measure, that registering guns is not going to solve crime problems. And they expect a similar problem that Illinois is having. This is a huge 2A win. Just like the pistol brace rule and the low compliance rate at the national level from the ATF, you're seeing this starting to happen at the local level. The only concern I have, and it's a minimal concern, honestly, because, I'm staying strapped and I'm always clapped. I'm staying strapped all the time, so I'll never get clapped. That's what I meant to say. It's becoming apparently clear that there's going to come a point in time where we're going to see law enforcement as irrelevant. And because we're already doing this in the 2A community. What happens when the regular people, those people that are totally the first ones to call the cops usually, when they see law enforcement as irrelevant? We're seeing that with the high crime rates right now, and that concerns me because, law enforcement, while I am not a huge fan of modern law enforcement because they seem to be the jackbooted thugs we've always been warned about that will absolutely curtail your rights because they're ordered to. And that, that sucks because I know a lot of good cops, and I've known a lot of good cops in my life, and they don't seem like the type to do that. Now, some of them have retired. Some of them are still in law enforcement now. But this is in a small town. And I don't see them lining up to take your rights. But I do see them willing to enforce rules or laws that they don't see just because they have a family to feed. And if that happens too often, what I see happening is exactly what is happening in the 2A community now. The 2A community is usually very law enforcement friendly, and they usually are the ones that, there's a lot of them that are the back the blue and from my cold dead hands and don't tread on me, not realizing that the people that are going to tread on you are your local law enforcement guys. The FBI doesn't have enough people to go door to door, but they can, however, deputize local law enforcement into national law enforcement agents. And this is where the sheriff comes in, and he has to be on your side, or she has to be on your side in the 2A. I think I'm blessed in that I've known my sheriff since high school. And he is a very, very strong advocate of the 2A. I honestly don't see him allowing FBI agents, because they're supposed to get local law enforcement, the sheriff specifically, their approval to go ahead and enforce something or come in and serve a warrant for said type of action in that area. I don't see my law enforcement agency, Shane Ferrari, actually doing that. You know, he kind of had to take a sideline during the COVID stuff. I think that was because we all didn't know what the hell was going on. Not making excuses for the man. But I honestly talked to the guy. You know, he has dealt with my family. He also owns a mortuary. And he's dealt with all three of my sister's passing, my mother's passing, and my father's passing. And he did it with honor and dignity, and he did it, you know, when he made arrangements around what I could afford to pay at the time, and still managed to make it work. So I have a bias towards Shane Ferrari. But I also have been down there protesting in Santa Fe, and Shane Ferrari is on our side, you know, telling me, hey, this is what they're probably going to try to do. Then I can relay it to my friends that are in the 2A that are protesting the same way. This is why I say that your sheriff is important. He's also the first one in New Mexico to come out to his elected officials that are over him, so to speak, you know, the county officials, and proposing a measure to make San Juan County a 2A sanctuary. You know, you don't see that from sheriffs willing to go out and put their butt on the line if they're not a fan of the 2A. And that's why I say the sheriffs are always a big thing you need to pay attention to in who you vote for. Now, back to what I'm saying about noncompliance. Think about those wins. It means that the ATF and the states in general, when they try to impose these really, really unjust laws, law-abiding citizens are finally saying no. That's a 2A win. That is a cultural win. And when they realize that it has no effect, because even the law-abiding citizens are saying no, they're going to have to stop. Now, in New Mexico, I've already covered this, but it's something to be said again. Our governor has renewed that 30-day ban on firearms in Bernalillo County and Albuquerque. Now, what's interesting about that is she had to rewrite this because there is case law that allows gun bans in public areas. But she has failed in it's not being adhered to, because gun violence and violence in general in Albuquerque is still going on. Why? Because we all know the simple truth. Criminals don't obey the laws. She admitted that. As I was saying, when citizens quit listening because the elected officials aren't listening to us, they eventually have to come to that realization, and they have to do one of two things. They either have to get more strict and more violent, in which case they'll get more pushback, or they have to back off because they've lost control of the situation. And seeing mass non-compliance in the 2A, to me, being the libertarian and cap type person that I am, is finally the step that is getting the most traction. You know, it's the same thing. I mentioned this 100 times on this podcast about the cannabis stuff. Cannabis became legal in a lot of cities and states because people just didn't comply. They didn't listen. The same thing has had to happen in the 2A community, despite us trying to walk that fine line of being law-abiding citizens. And Biden can pass every measure he wants to by executive fiat, or any other president from then on, and the governor can do it, the same things, and if no one listens, the law doesn't work. You know, there are stupid laws on the books that people don't listen to or don't obey anyway, and they're not enforced by the law enforcement agents. In Florida, it's illegal for women to go skydiving on Sunday. Do you honestly think they are going to enforce that law? Because it's stupid. In some cities and states, it's illegal to have pies cooling on the windowsill on certain days because it was put into law because it attracted rodents and stuff. But those laws aren't enforced. You don't see cops going in door to door in those cities and saying, hey, your pies are cooling on the counter or on the windowsill. We're going to fine you or we're going to arrest you. Hell, we're now seeing law enforcement in a lot of areas just not enforcing things. Look at California. They have open-air drug markets, open-air drug use. They're not enforcing anything. And while that is a decay of American society, it's also kind of necessary in that there has to be some sort of police reform, law enforcement reform. We have allowed law enforcement in a lot of areas to become, well, authoritarian. And it's time that the American people start pushing back and saying no. Now, I'm not saying that the world shouldn't have law enforcement. I'm not saying that we should defund police. If anything, I think we should look at reforms in training of law enforcement. You know, we have listening to a police scanner almost nightly. You hear them being law enforcement being called to be parents because parents can't police their kids or can't take care of their kids. You see them respond as first responders, like EMS people, and they're giving first aid. You see them respond to, or I hear them respond to people who have mental issues. Okay? You keep having more and more things added to them, and yet they're supposed to go through a training that lasts maybe 18 months and then they go straight out in the field. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Name one other profession that you get 18 months of training and then you're expected to perform it flawlessly every day because life is on the line. You know, we don't do that to doctors. We don't do that to nurses. What makes you think you can do something like that and end up with a good result? I think a lot of what is going on in society and the demonization of law enforcement is because they're being pushed into places that they don't belong. Cops aren't mental health people. And at the same time, putting a mental health professional in a cop suit is not the answer either. When you have a mental issue, I understand why they're sending law enforcement, because in this day and age, you don't know if that person's going to snap and draw a gun, pull a knife, do something stupid. But at the same time, we haven't addressed the problem. What's creating this mental health problem? What's creating these issues that we keep seeing law enforcement have to pick up? Because these are new or newer to law enforcement. You talk to cops that, you know, were in the 80s, retired in the 80s, retired in the 90s, worked through the 80s and retired in the 90s. And you find out that they didn't have to deal with these issues that we're having now. You know, you're not having to go to a parent's house because mom and dad are fighting with the kid, and the kid can't deal with it, and the parents don't know what to do with the kid melting down, so they call the cops. You know, I'm sure it happened in the 80s and 90s, but not to the scale and level that we're seeing now. So what's changed? And it's change in our culture. You know, how you put that down some ways you can put it in the lack and loss of religion, because religion gave you a moral framework. It's also the lack and loss of just a basic moral framework of being an American citizen, knowing your rights and knowing what you should do as an American citizen, having some sort of civics put into practice. Because learning those things in school, for me personally, was something that kind of trained me how to be an American citizen. I think that did it for a lot of people from my generation. And then it's kind of my generation's fault, because we allowed technology to raise kids. And we used the TV as a babysitter. And that's not a good thing, because kids naturally get attracted to things we don't necessarily want them to see. It's people having to stand up and be a parent. Now, a lot of us did stand up and be a parent. And you can tell by the kids we raised, because every kid has an issue. Every person has some sort of issue. But it's apparent in the generation that we're raising now that there are some of us that got the memo of, hey, you got to step up and say no sometimes. And there are others that realize that if you just let the kid have whatever they want, they'll shut up. And that created spoiled, rotten kids that have no moral compass, because all they care about is their own self-satisfaction. And that has trickled down into society, and we're seeing that decay. It's a double-edged sword, because like I said, all along, the 2A folks, all of us that have been fighting this battle in the 2A for years, have been trying to fight the legal system so that these unjust laws weren't passed and weren't ratified, to no avail. What would have been better is if we just simply didn't listen to them. If we simply did not care what they passed, what these guys passed as law. Now, to some degree we have to, because when you pass a law that says you can't import guns or you can't manufacture this type of gun, then the market has to adjust fire because of the law. The letter of the law has to be followed by manufacturers. We don't have a completely free market as it should be, because the market usually, as it was intended to, will provide a solution to any problem. Just give it time. But if you allow the government to create crony capitalism, I swear I haven't had anything to drink today, I'm a little tired. But if you allow the government to create crony capitalism, then you allow an unlevel playing ground, and people have to abide by those rules just to exist. Now that comes with a double-edged sword too, because then you're talking about the Wild West in the market. But if you make a dangerous product, no one will buy it eventually. If it will truly kill you or truly kill their customers will eventually go away, and the people that are smart enough to find out a thing or two about whatever they're buying won't buy it. And that's what we're seeing. You're seeing years of decay manifest, or years of neglect, I should say, not decay, manifest in a very rapid decay. You can't have 100 years of one party, any party, rule an area, and then not see the repercussions of the policies stack up. I'm talking about California, but I see it even in New Mexico. New Mexico, we've had 70 plus years of Democratic rule. And we are one of the worst states in the union for education. We're one of the worst states in the union for crime right now. We're one of the worst states in the union economically. And the same can be said for New York, California, Chicago, Illinois, the whole state of Illinois. You allow those policies to stack up and you start seeing decay. I'm kind of torn there, But at the same time, I'm very happy to see that there's a lot of people waking up and seeing that non-compliance is probably the best way to do it. Peaceful non-compliance. Peaceful protesting. That's what it is. Like, share, subscribe, be great.